good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, whatever time you're listening to the show, whether it's on the radio or online. You are listening to Recharging the Human Battery here on AM 950 Radio. And Dr. Sinacropi and I have swapped spots again. So you've got me today, co-host, nurse practitioner Mandi Dickey. And if you've been listening to the show at all, you know that when I come on, I usually do my little TBI takeover, the ABCs of concussion, but I'm not going to do that today. I have a little bit of a different topic, maybe a little bit more serious, I guess, a little bit more of a deep conversation today. We talk a lot about recharging your body, what you can do to make the most of your body. And we also talk a lot about being the CEO of your own healthcare. Being the CEO of your own healthcare means that you have decisions that you can make. And sometimes we don't realize all those decisions. We don't realize how much power we have in our medical care. And today is going to be another one of those kind of you have decision-making power in your healthcare conversations, just a little bit of a different topic. So today I'm going to talk about beginnings and endings. So we are in the beginning of September here, which means we are in the beginning of school. So in the last few weeks, all of our kids have gone back to school. They're back in their regular activities, their regular schedules. So they went from kind of having a little bit more freedom over the summer and waking up whenever they wanted, going to sleep whenever they wanted to now having to get up and get ready before the bus comes or before they go to school, however they get there. And our school district in particular does things a little bit differently. On the first day of school, they only have the new students there. So in middle school, it's just the sixth graders that come in. In high school, it's just the ninth graders that come in. And then any new students to the district can come on those days to get used to the building without having a lot of other people there. But everybody else starts online that first day to get to know their classrooms, or classes, I guess I should say, read the syllabus, figure out what all their assignments are. And then everybody comes back on day 2. But by now we are a week into school for those of you that started after Labor Day. Other students started beforehand. And they all have these transitions that they're making. It might be a transition to a new school. So maybe they moved up from elementary to middle school, from middle school to high school. Maybe some high schoolers going off to college. All of these new beginnings for them in this life. It might be a new district. Maybe maybe districts combine at a certain point. Where I went to school, there were 2 different areas that came together to form one single high school. Might be that kind of thing where there's a lot of new students, new faces. Or it might be a new state altogether. Maybe your family had to move and you're completely uprooting everything and making that new beginning for everyone. New jobs, new everything at that point, new beginnings for everyone in the family. And there can be some anxieties about starting these new things. Starting something new, even though there's a possibility for really great things there, can cause a lot of anxiety for some students, which is why I think our school district has moved to having only the new students and only those first year in that building come in that first day to try to decrease some of their anxiety about going this and making this transition. And then another first might be some new teachers. So they've graduated from their programs. This might be their first teaching job. So we've got so many new things that are happening, so many beginnings that are happening in this beginning of the school season. There are also endings when we have those beginnings. So the end of summer. We have the end of family vacations for the year. For the most part, some people still take trips during the school year, but for the most part, it's going to be the end of those family vacation times. And as we are looking at our children aging, my husband and I both have 16-year-olds who are starting their junior year of high school. This was our second to last family vacation summer before the kids all go off to college. So there's a lot of endings that come with that as well. And there's a lot more of these beginning and ending kind of conversations that we're going to have when we come back from the break on the other side. I just wanted to give you a teaser of what today is going to look like. So again, here on AM 950 Radio with Recharging the Human Battery, Mandi Dickey. I will see you on the other side of the break. Welcome back on AM 950 Radio, here with Recharging the Human Battery. Again, co-host, nurse practitioner Mandi Dickey here. And we're talking about beginnings and endings today. So At the beginning of the show, I was talking about how our kids have been going back to school, starting all of these new transitions. But with those beginnings come the endings, as I was mentioning. So the end of summer, the end of those family vacations. Next summer, I've already started talking with our kids. It's going to be our last summer before they go off to college. So we really want to try to get in a good family vacation next year before they all go off to do their adult type of activities. And then for some students, thinking about that, this might be their last first day of school. As you're following your friends, your family, and everybody's posting their kids' first day of school pictures, you're also getting some of those that this is their last first day of school picture because they're seniors in high school. But last year, even when my oldest child went on to start his doctorate at the University of Minnesota, I had him send me a picture of himself on his first day of class so that I could post that one too, because he's still having a first day of school. So there are those last that come with it too. And then sometimes we have teachers preparing for retirement. So they might already be announcing that they're going to be retiring sometime during the school year or at the end of the school year. And we have these endings that come along with the beginning. So when one door closes, another one always opens, right? So all of these beginnings and endings happen together. And all of these other beginnings that might start, there's a lot of beginnings and endings within healthcare over the summer. So that we didn't really talk about those as they happened. But in July every year, we have a new crop of medical students that start, or medical residents. So they switch, and we've got some graduating at the end of their programs. They finish at the end of June, and then 1st of July, these new residents are starting. So we have all this shifting over the summer with beginnings and endings. And we have these new nurses graduating from nursing school and passing their board certification exams. And again, we've got beginnings and endings as we go through that summer. And then summer is always full of weddings, the start of new families. And then we get to end of life, kind of the biggest ending that we have in our life, right? And as far as I know so far, life is a terminal condition because none of us have figured out how to get out of it without going through that end of life position. So regardless of whether it's expected or not at the time, it's still difficult to deal with end of life. So this is going to be the majority of my conversation today with you guys today is talking about this end of life. And in these last few weeks, we had the beginning of school. We had all that excitement of everybody starting, and then we had a school shooting. So we had families here in Minneapolis that had to deal with the unspeakable. They had ending of life as their students were beginning their school year, which I could go on and on that one forever, but I'm not going to get real deep into the weeds on that one, other than it wasn't expected. It shouldn't have happened. During COVID, when we had the massive beginnings of the COVID stages, our morgues were filled to capacity as society was dealing with this new novel virus that was wiping out people with low immune systems, and we just weren't ready for that kind of virus to take on our society. And in the U.S. alone, it's estimated that there's somewhere around 5,500 new cancer diagnoses every day. And it's estimated that around 1,600 people die from cancer every day. So we have a lot of endings, some of them kind of expected because of this cancer, but we don't expect to get cancer. So it's still unexpected, even though we're expecting the end at that point. Globally, it's estimated that about 7,000 people die from chronic illnesses every day. And we've talked about chronic illness a lot on this show. Many of those chronic illnesses could be prevented or changed or altered if we take that role on of CEO of our own healthcare and make some different choices in our life. We have 22 million people approximately needing end-of-life care at any given time. So that's, again, why are we having this end-of-life conversation? Because it is such a prevalent thing and we see these huge numbers. But even with these numbers, at no point is that end of life easy to deal with, whether or not it's expected, whether or not we see it coming and we know that it is coming. And in my 13 years of being a nurse practitioner, I have dealt a lot of bad news to patients and their families. I have diagnosed malignant brain tumors. I have diagnosed rare brain infections that you only hear about it in articles, and then I would see them in person and never think that I would actually see them in person. Devastating brain bleeds and strokes. And all of these diagnoses came with that terminal condition that this loved one of yours is not going to live any longer. I think the hardest one, the one that still sticks with me the longest, is this 90-some-year-old patient that I had. The patient was not going to wake up, and I had to have a conversation with her family. And she and her husband had been together for like 70 years. longer than I can even imagine to be with a partner at this point in my life. So 70 years together that they had spent, and I was giving him the news that his wife was not going to wake up from her diagnoses. And he understood that she was going to a better place, and he knew what her wishes were. He knew that she didn't want to suffer. He knew that he didn't want to prolong her body lying in that bed just to appease their family's emotions. They were very comfortable knowing that she was going on to a better place. And at one point, he was actually consoling me because my voice was cracking. How do you tell somebody that's been with their partner for 70 years that they're no longer going to be together? That was a really hard conversation for me to have. But he made it so much easier. And I think it was less of me hugging him, but of more of him hugging me at that point, because he was okay with that. And how do you find a family that's okay with that? It's really hard to see that. It's not something you see every day, or not something that I've seen every day in healthcare giving out that news. And then alongside of that, so as I'm getting teary, I keep thinking about the fact that they teach us in school, in nursing school, medical school, PA, nurse practitioner, any of those programs, they're teaching us not to get attached to our patients, try not to have emotions. But it's really hard not to be a human and have emotions when you're dealing with a case such as that, when you've got somebody who is losing their partner of 70 years. When, again, I can never even imagine to have a partner that long. So given that, it's really important for you and your family to know what your wishes are at the end of life. So if there's time to plan, it's best to do so that you don't leave any questions for those people that you are leaving behind when you do pass away. So, for an example, my mother has her own funeral planned out to the T. Every detail of it, the music, the weddings, the readings, everything that's going to be part of her funeral. Her sister had the same thing before she passed unexpectedly, and we were grateful that she had that. And she named me as somebody that she wanted to have sing in her funeral. And I did, but man, was that hard to do. But I did it because she wanted me to. So if you have all these wishes and you have an idea of what you want that funeral to look like, it's great to put that in writing so that people don't have to wonder, what would you want at that end of life? Because there's so much stress. When somebody is passing away, the rest of the family is wrought with emotions. So when they don't have to make those decisions in a time when they're very emotional, it's really helpful for that family to have that peace of mind that they're doing what their loved one wanted them to do, and they don't have to think about it. So the thing that my mother doesn't have prepared is her advance directive. So what am I talking about when I say advance directive? And this is something that really everybody should do regardless of age, but it's a plan for how you want the end of life to go, should you not be able to tell anybody at that moment. So it's a plan that can include specifics on your preferences for treatments, like whether or not you want to be intubated, meaning do you want a tube and a machine helping you breathe if you can't breathe for yourself? Do you want a feeding tube if you can't eat and swallow and drink on your own? Do you want an IV for any kind of fluids or nutrition? How about resuscitation? Do you want us to do compressions and try to bring you back if your heart stops? And people don't think about these things. They just say, well, yes, I want you to do everything you can to try to save my life. And in some cases, it might be a good idea to do everything. So if we are looking at maybe a temporary thing, so if you're a young person and you're trying to decide, what do I want in my advance directive? If you get in a car accident and you have a sudden trauma, so traumatic brain injury is my thing, right? Historically, we've always thought that if somebody has a severe traumatic brain injury, they have a bleed into their brain, they have a skull fracture, historically, we've always thought that they have a low chance of survival. But in recent research, they've actually identified that people that have had bleeds and skull fractures, some of those actually recover better than somebody with a, quote, mild traumatic brain injury. So that recovery could actually look really good. And they've come out with a statement in the last year that really we shouldn't be making decisions on end-of-life treatment in the first 28 days after somebody has a traumatic brain injury, because they still have that possibility of recovery and getting back to a meaningful life. So we really shouldn't be making those decisions to just end life at those instances. So if you're a young person who might be looking at that as a possibility in your future, and it could be the possibility for any of us, You might think that, for a short period of time, yes, I do want that feeding tube to help me survive and give me a chance and see if I can recover. Yes, I do want that breathing tube to help me survive and give me a chance and see if I can recover. Rather than saying, no, I don't want any of those things at all. You can list that in this advance directive to be specific on, in this instance, in X, Y, and Z instance, I am okay with these tubes. In a different instance, I am not okay with these tubes. If it's not looking like there's a chance for me to recover, no, I don't want those life-saving measures. So you can be very specific in how much support you want and when you want that support. Also in that advance directive, it includes naming a healthcare proxy. Some people call this a healthcare power of attorney. Healthcare power of attorney and plain power of attorney are very different. So a financial power of attorney has that power to make financial decisions for you. A healthcare power of attorney, somebody who is named in this advance directive for making your medical decisions, can only make your medical decisions. They do not get access to your bank accounts and have everything else. They can only make those medical decisions that you have laid out. And essentially, they're not making the decisions, they're just enacting. They're following through on the wishes that you already laid out for them. So that's the person that can speak for you if you can't, and they can follow those wishes that you've already set forth. So it makes it really easy for that healthcare power of attorney, that healthcare proxy. They don't have to make any decisions. They don't have to think about anything. All they have to do is flip to that page and this is what my loved one would want in this instant. That's all they have to do. So they're just enforcing what you've already written down. So with that said, it's really important to have a conversation with that person that you list as your healthcare power of attorney or healthcare proxy so that they know what your wishes are. At one point, when I had made a document, I'd put one of my sisters down as my healthcare power of attorney, and she said, okay, well, great, well, just let me know what your wishes are. So she's not surprised in the end as well. So they need to be knowledgeable, and they need to be willing to carry out those wishes that you have. Advance directive is not a living will. These are two very different documents. So a living will, if you've heard that term, has a very narrow focus. It just is focused on end-of-life treatments, whereas that advance directive is much more broad. It can include all future medical care, not just end-of-life, but anything in that transitional period that we're kind of talking about. If somebody gets into a traumatic accident and they have a chance of survival from it, we might be just doing that care in the supportive phase and not thinking about the end of life at that point. An advance directive can include a living will, but they are not synonymous. They are not the same thing. And I've heard a lot of patients and family members kind of confusing those two titles and what those documents are. Why is it important to have this? If you have a large family and they may not all be in agreement with each other, maybe some people are very much pro doing everything to keep you alive and other people are very much not, because maybe there's a belief that you have an expiration date. We all don't know what our expiration date is, but there is a greater power, whether you believe it's God or whether you don't, that God would be calling you home at the end of your life. And some people would say that if you're doing these things to stop it, that you are stopping God from taking you home. So there might be very different extremes in your families on your experiences and what you want to have at the end of life. And I say this from experience from working in the hospital and seeing this happen, where family members start arguing with each other and fighting at the last minute because their loved one didn't have anything written down about what they wanted, and everybody was fighting about what they thought the person was going to want. So you really are relieving your family of having those arguments if you put things in writing. So it's really, really important to make your wishes known. Let them follow the wishes rather than trying to think about what you may have wanted, because your family members may have very different opinions on that. And then it's just really easy, again, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, when we have all these emotions, trying to think about what the person may have wanted during that time frame is really hard to do when you have all these emotions going on about this is your last moment and what can you do and what do you want to do. Whereas, again, if it's spelled out, you just flip to that page and you find what your loved one's wishes were. There are facilities that are better at following these wishes than others. Probably about a decade or so ago, I heard that the facility that I was working with was known as a good place to go to die. That does not mean that you go there and they don't provide care to you or they provide less than quality care. It actually means that they have a great palliative care program, and I'll talk about that in a moment here. They're great about following your end-of-life wishes. So if you want to go to a place where you know that they're going to follow through and do what you want to do rather than trying to push you into doing things that you don't want at your end of life, those are the facilities you want to go to. And you can find a Google list that will tell you some of these better places that have these great palliative care programs. And again, that does not mean that they're not going to take care of you. It doesn't mean that you're going to go there and they're going to just quickly end your life. That is not what that means. It's the exact opposite. People know that they are going to get cared for when they go to a facility like that. They know they're going to be comfortable. There are a lot of things that we can do to extend people's lives sometimes. But just because we can doesn't mean we always should. Again, it's looking at that quality of life. What's in the best interest of the patient, your loved one? What is in their best interest? Sometimes we, as the people who are still here, have a really hard time letting go, and we want to hold on to that person as long as we can. But the thing you need to remember is that as that person is coming to the end of their life, it's not that same quality of life that they had when they were awake and not in that hospital bed. So that's the thing that we need to think about and not be so selfish on our own because we're not ready to say goodbye yet. So I said I was going to talk about what palliative care is, and I'm going to talk about that here a little bit too. Palliative care sometimes has different meanings to different people. And in some places, palliative care is considered to be end-of-life care. And that may or may not be synonymous with hospice care. I think a lot of us here in Minnesota are knowledgeable about the word hospice, meaning end of life. Typically, you have to have a diagnosis that says that you will have less than 6 months to live or up to 6 months, but in order to qualify to be on hospice care. Some states call that palliative care. So depending on where you live in the United States, you might have a different terminology for that. But palliative versus hospice does not necessarily mean the same thing, even though some facilities might call it the same thing. So if you're assumed it's going to be 6 months or less, you can qualify to enter these hospice care programs. And it does not mean that you absolutely have to pass within those 6 months. I have talked to people that work in hospice, and they have some patients that do stay under their care for a couple of years because none of us have crystal balls that we can say exactly when that expiration date is going to come. But we anticipate, and things can change. Sometimes if you are providing more comfort-based care for people, they actually will live longer because they're more comfortable. So palliative care in other instances, it's taught in medical education that it's palliative care helps to palliate, make them comfortable with any kind of chronic disease. So you can be, in Minnesota, you can be accepted into a palliative care program having a chronic or multiple chronic illnesses because they help you manage those chronic illnesses. They make sure that you have medications to control your pain, to control discomfort, to control any other things that come up in your life so that you can live comfortably. Not necessarily at the end of your life, but you can just live your life comfortably. So that allows individuals to make those decisions about their healthcare. Again, that's CEO of your own healthcare, right? When you have that ability to make those decisions, you can choose what you want to do, what you don't want to do. And when we've talked about this previously on the show, it needs to be an educated discussion. So you do need to know the risks of not seeking care. You need to know the risks of seeking care because medications, treatments all come with side effects. They all come with some sort of risk. And so does not doing those medications or treatments. But you have that opportunity to make those decisions to be the CEO of your own healthcare and choose what you want to do, what you don't want to do once you've been given the education on what all the options are. There should never be a time when somebody's telling you have to do these things because you don't have to do anything. And that's probably very interesting coming from a healthcare provider telling you that, but you do have those choices. That said, you can have all of these things in place. You can have your advance directive written out. You can have your knowledge of the fact that you're in hospice care or palliative care, and you know that the end is coming. But whether or not you know that end is coming, it's still never expected, and it still comes too soon. So a good example of this, my father-in-law was diagnosed with end-stage colon cancer 2 years ago, right before my husband and I got married. So he didn't want to tell us before the wedding because he didn't want to ruin our special day. But he was acting weird on the phone, so my husband got it out of him, and he admitted that this was the diagnosis that he had been given. And he was given 6 months to live 2 years ago, and he has not passed at this point yet. We moved him in with us about a year ago to help support him a little bit more because he was down in Arizona. He didn't have the support down there to really get all the care that he needed. So we moved him up in here with us so we could help him get to his appointments. We could go to his appointments with him and help him understand what was going on and help get better care. At that point, he was still fairly independent, could still do a lot. And actually, when he came up to us and had better health care, his health improved. We got him onto hospice care shortly after he moved in with us because, again, he was given 6 months to live again because his cancer had spread. And he continued going on, even on hospice care. So that's why I know that hospice care can go on beyond that 6-month time frame because of that personal experience with it. But 2 weeks ago, we had to move him into a facility because we weren't at the point where we could provide the care that he needed anymore. My husband and I both work. Our kids were going to go off to school. The kids were really helpful over the summer to check on him and help him out. But he needed more care than what we could provide at home. So we moved him into a facility, and it's been really hard to watch him kind of deteriorate while he's there because he's getting closer and closer to the end. And as I watch my husband prepare to lose his father, his last living parent, I'm reminded of all of those patients that I cared for over the years and all of the hands that I've held over the years as family members maybe weren't able to be there at those last moments, or maybe people had outlived their family members and they no longer had anybody to come be with them at the end of life. And I just keep thinking about all of these patients that I've had in 25 years of working in healthcare, 13 as a nurse practitioner, but 25 total. That's a lot of years, a lot of hands to be held. Which brings me to some of those self-care reminders. And this is the thing that my husband actually asked me to talk about today, because I've been reminding him to take care of himself in this whole process. If you are the family of that person and you're counting all of those last breaths of your family member, you need to remember to take your breaths yourself. You need to remember to take care of yourself because you cannot provide for anyone else when you are going from an empty battery. Again, we're talking about on recharging the human battery. We're talking about recharging yourselves. You have to take a moment to recharge yourself because you are no good to that person that is passing if you can't take care of your own health. When I was working in the hospital originally as a bedside nurse, so back in 2002, long time ago as a nurse, I always encouraged families to go home and get their rest. I encouraged them to get out just long enough to go grab a meal, whether it was just the hospital cafeteria or actually getting out of the building to go grab a meal. I let them know that their family member was in good hands and we would take really good care of them while they were out, but they needed to take care of themselves because I couldn't do that part for them. I couldn't feed them. I can feed their loved one. So they needed to go take that time to take care of themselves. While they were out, there were so many times that I would give their loved one, if he was a male, I would give him a good shave. If he was usually clean shaven and he was really scruffy, I would take that time. I had never shaved a man's face before, but I've shaved so many men's faces in the hospital, preparing them for their family members to come back and see them all clean and ready to go. I clipped toenails and fingernails and gave baths, and sometimes it was their last bath. And there were a handful of times that I still recall that we would bathe the patient, change the sheets, get everything all nice and clean, knowing that their family was coming in the morning. This was on overnight shift, and we would roll them from side to side to do all this, and they would stop breathing. And we would quickly roll them back again to get them in a position where those breaths would restart, because we didn't want to be the ones to see those last breaths. We wanted their family members to be there to see them take their last breaths, because we knew that they were coming, and maybe that was going to be an hour before they were going to get there. But we wanted to make sure that their family would be present so that they didn't miss that moment. As a nurse practitioner, I still give those reminders to people, reminding families to go take their breaks, to go get their food. I'm not the one doing that nursing care anymore. My nursing colleagues are, but they're still doing it. So you still have that care that you get from those facilities as you're at that end of life. But it's still really important to take care of yourself, because the last thing that your loved one wants is for you to then have a health issue because you weren't taking care of yourself in this moment. And as my father-in-law is lying in his healthcare facility, laying in that bed, there are so many times that I've gone in and I've rubbed down his legs with lotion. I did that several times for him before at the house too, before he moved. But just rubbing the lotion on his legs, giving him that massage, that helped give him that personal touch. And my husband always laughs at me because I don't do it with gloves on. I like that. We wear gloves all the time to to decrease the risk of transmission of infection, blah, blah, blah. But there are times that you really just need that personal touch. And I'm really grateful that I've been able to do that in safe instances and have that personal touch with my patients over the years that I'm still able to do for my father-in-law as he is getting close to his last breaths. The other day I got there before my husband did, and I noticed my father-in-law was kind of scruffy. So I took out his electric razor. It had been a long time since I've shaved a patient's face, probably since before I had started working as a nurse practitioner. But man, it was kind of reminiscent of all those years that I spent in the hospital, and it made me feel really good to get him all cleaned up. He didn't remember that I did it. He woke up a little bit later and he's like, maybe we should shave me. And I'm like, no, I already did. We'd taken care of. And it can be really easy to forget your own needs as that family member, as I was saying. And you don't, sometimes if you're there all the time and you don't want to miss any moments, you don't want to leave that bedside, but you really, really need to. And again, you're not good to anybody if you don't take care of yourself. And if you're thinking about all of this time that you're spending with that loved one, which my husband has felt very guilty lately of all this the time he's spending with his father now because his daughter's at home, I'm at home, my kids are at home. It's a matter of trying to find that balance. And I told him on multiple occasions, and I said, at this point, there really is not a balance. You spend the time where you need to spend the time. So you do need to be present for your daily life and show up for your loved ones that are still here, but you still need to show up for your loved one that is passing because their moments are fleeting. They don't have that. And I think I've seen that conversation so many times with when it comes down to our pets, but we don't think about our loved ones at the end. So we really need to make sure that we're spending that time with them so that they know that they are loved, that they have experienced life, and that they're not alone in those last moments. But again, still take care of yourself too. As a healthcare worker, I will tell you that I wrote my first advance directive for myself when I was in my 20s. I'm in my 40s now, and things have changed in my life. So as I've talked about the advance directive with you today and I talked about laying out those decisions, it's really important that if you do choose to make those advance directives early in life, that you go back and you update them periodically. If something should happen to me, I didn't want my family to have to make those decisions because I do come from a very large family with very different opinions on life and what end of life should look like sometimes. And I didn't want my family to be arguing like I had seen my patients' families do so many times. That said, I named my spouse at the time as my healthcare proxy, my healthcare power of attorney. I am no longer with that spouse. So that's probably not the person that should be making those decisions for me at the end of life anymore. So if you do make your advance directive early, it's important to go back and check on that periodically. And if you have life changes yourself, then you go back and see, is that still really what I want? Is the person that's listed as my healthcare proxy still the person that I want making those decisions? And really making sure that you keep that document updated. Once you have that written, you do also need to share your healthcare directive with your healthcare provider so that it can be put on file in your medical record. Your provider knows what's happening. If you are in some kind of accident, they can look it up. If something happens and your family is not around, they can look it up and see that it's in your healthcare record. The joy of having electronic medical records now is that we can see things across systems as long as you give that permission. But in a traumatic event, we can get emergency care and look it up and see if you have something like that written up. But again, it's important to share that document with your healthcare provider. It's important to share that document with the person that you list as your healthcare proxy, that healthcare power of attorney. And if you have a safe or something at home where you keep your important documents, that should go in that safe as well. So you have that document and make sure that your family knows where it is. Make sure they know it exists. Make sure that they know where it is in case that they need to use it. I've had several family members that have come in and we have on file that the person has an advance directive, but the copy of it is not on file and their family members don't even know that they had it. So then we're back to square one and trying to figure out, well, what do you think the person would want at end of life? And that's not the decisions you want to be making at the end of life, is what do I think they would want? Because their wishes might be a little bit different than you think when they get to that point. And when we're talking about all of this, I've kind of been lightheartedly talking as a healthcare provider, and it's really easy for me to go into healthcare provider mode in this. And I think I'm still kind of there, even with my father-in-law, because I have been referred to as the nurse of the family, and I've done a lot of nursing care for him at home and at the facility. And it's really easy to be in that healthcare mode. And as family members are asking me questions, as even he has been asking me questions along the way, I give it in very medical terms, because I try to distance myself in that point and keep it kind of distance as they taught us in school, not to get attached with that. But it also leads to a different style of grief. And grief is a really important thing to talk about when we're talking about end of life, because no end of life discussion would be complete without talking about it. While we all do suffer the same terminal disease, we all will have our end of life at some point. We don't want to think about it all the time, and we are never ready for it. So even if somebody has an expected termination coming up, we know that they're on hospice, we know that they're at the end of their life, you're still never ready. No matter how ready you think you are, you're still never ready. And you still will grieve, because there's a grief process that everyone goes through. And there are several steps, and grieving, just like recovery from anything else, is not a linear process. So you can go back and forth on that grief process many, many times as you go through it. Everyone grieves differently, and it's easy to judge someone for how they grieve. Maybe you say, well, they shouldn't be grieving this long, or they shouldn't be grieving that hard, or they shouldn't be out going and enjoying their lives because they should be grieving. And everybody grieves differently. There is no wrong way to grieve, and everybody will grieve in their own time. Some people won't have it hit them immediately. Some people, it will hit them later on. And even if they maybe didn't have the strongest relationship with their loved one toward the end of their life, they still will have some sort of feelings. I had a patient recently, her mother passed away. She had been in hospice and she had passed away, and they had never had a good relationship because her mother was fairly abusive growing up. That doesn't mean you're not going to grieve that death. And she was saying that she felt bad because she never had the relationship with her mother that she wanted to. Well, you know what? That's grieving. That is grief, because you're grieving the relationship that you never got to have with that person. So everybody will go through grief. What it looks like will be different for every person. Every person in the family will have a different way of grieving, different style of grieving, and none of them are wrong. And you have to give yourself time, give your family members time to grieve. That said, the only thing I will say, a caveat with that, is to remember to be present with your other loved ones who are still here with you. I have seen this too many times also in healthcare, where people get so lost in their grief of the person that passed that they then don't keep up the relationships with the other people that are still there. And if it's a child that passes and the parents then either become hyper-focused on the other child that's still alive, or they don't really get that attention, it can make for some difficult relationships. So while you are grieving the loss of that loved one that you have, it's still important to be present and acknowledge and let those people that are still alive with you know that you love them and they are important in your life as well. So finding that balance, and again, there's never really a good balance, but just finding all of those connection points. So really deep conversation we've been having today, and there's never really a good place to pause for that, but we do need to take a quick radio break here for a moment. So when we come back, we'll talk about this much more here on AM 950 Radio with Recharging the Human Battery.
All right, back on pause now.
It's a deep conversation today.
No, it's been good stuff, though. I think, yeah, as you kind of changing of the seasons, it kind of works as a topic, I think.
It's been an interesting experience, that's for sure. Hello and welcome back one last time for today here on AM 950 Radio with Recharging the Human Battery. Again, you've been listening to co-host, nurse practitioner Mandi Dickey today as Dr. Stefano Sinacropi is out. And today we've been talking about beginnings and endings. We talked about at the very beginning of the show of starting school and all the new changes that come in the fall. And I didn't mention fall is actually my favorite time of year because of all the new beginnings and the changes. And I love the color changes on the trees. And that is a good kind of lesson with this. We've been also talking about end of life and end of life care and how to make those decisions, what to do with end of life, how to plan for that before you get there. And fall is a really good time to show us that even as things change and even as the colors fade and things pass, that good things can come beyond that. So sometimes we need to shed things in order to have new things come to life. And as we talk about going through the grief process, and that was the last thing we talked about before the break, was going through the grief process of loss when we have a loved one leave us here on earth. Some people have taken that to be a negative connotation. So grief can be a really strong emotion that some people have difficulty getting back out of, and it can change how we think about the future, and it can make us much more aware of our own future endings. But at the same time, there are some people that will take that loss and make something completely beautiful out of it. I have seen so many people come up with nonprofit organizations to support the cause that their family member passed away from, or sometimes they will add to research and provide new research funding for whatever their loved one passed away from. And some beautiful things can come from the loss of a life. That's not to say that we're not sad about that loss that we have, but it's to say that we can take that and make a greater purpose out of it. We've talked about that on previous episodes when we've talked about healing from a traumatic brain injury. It's not a loss per se of a life, but it can be a loss of the person that you were, and that grief process can make some amazing things come out of it because people can again take that loss and use it for greater purposes. So whatever grief that you're going through, whatever loss that you're dealing with, go through those emotions because you have to go through the emotions. You cannot not have the emotions. And you can try to say, "Oh, I'm not going to do that. That's not going to be me. I'm going to tough this one out," but nobody can really tough it out forever. Those emotions will catch up with you, which is why I said earlier that grief will happen. For some people, it'll happen at different time frames. It'll look different in those different time frames. But we need to acknowledge it. We need to live through it, and that experience will make you a different, potentially stronger person in the end for it. And here's a great reminder that life is very short in the grand scheme of things. So Earth has been around for millions of years. We've come and go over the time, and life is constantly changing. Things are constantly changing. We have births, we have deaths, we have all of this give and take, and life is really short, and we never are guaranteed tomorrow. So my last bits of wisdom today will be just to kind of make the most of your life. So while we're preparing to say goodbye to my father-in-law, we're waiting for those last breaths to actually happen. I've welcomed great nieces and great nephews into our family in the last year or so. And that's new lives that have come up and new giggles and new joys and new things to find in the wake of all of the negativity of potentially losing a family member here. We've got upcoming weddings. We've got some of my nieces and nephews going off to college. Life continues to change, and that change is the inevitable part. So things will always change. Things will always happen, expected or not, and we need to be able to make the most of it. So again, last piece of advice here today is to make a life that you're proud of. Make a life that you are proud to tell stories of. As my father-in-law has been at the end of his life here, I've been asking him to tell me stories about when he was growing up, and it's been so much fun hearing those stories because he's lived a very full life. So last words today, thoroughly enjoy your hobbies, thoroughly enjoy your loved ones, put your best effort in at work, live fully, stop to smell the roses, stop to take pictures of sunrises and sunsets, enjoy your life because we're never guaranteed tomorrow, but I hope you are so that you can come back next week to listen to us again. So thanks for listening today here on Recharging the Human Battery, AM 950 Radio. You've been listening to Mandi Dickey. Have a great weekend. Love your family. Love yourselves.